Hello and welcome to week 4. We're talking about social activism. And so today's reading is Beyond Resistance, Youth Activism and Community Change. Let's listen. As hundreds of young people descended on Oakland City Hall in August of 2002, they chanted in unison, "You can't stop the power of the youth because the power of the youth won't stop." Confronting Mayor Jerry Brown's decision to spend nearly $70 million to hire 100 police officers to patrol Oakland's underfunded schools, youth collectively forced the city to allocate $7 million to youth programs throughout the city. Youth activism has always played a central role in the democratic process and continues to forge new grounds for social change. Young people participation in movements in South Africa to end apartheid, in China's infamous Tiananmen Square, and in the hills of Chiapas, Mexico, to bring greater sovereignty to indigenous people all remind us how young people struggle for justice against all odds. One lesson we draw from these movements is that young people are agents of social change. It is precisely this notion of agency that gives rise to important democratic movements throughout our history. What happens, however, when young people are silenced and restricted from participating in important civic affairs? In what ways do young people push, shove, and elbow their way into the democratic process? What stands in young people's way in their relentless pursuit of social change? Young people aren't agents of change, not simple subjects to change. Youth collective action tends to be absent from the perspectives of young people held by many policymakers, education researchers, and youth development practitioners. The dominant paradigm of psychological approaches to development allows only for a view of young people as empty or inert vessels that competent and qualified adults must fill with opposite kinds of knowledge, attitudes, and norms. When they finally reach adulthood and move beyond the rites of passage set out in adolescence, young people supposedly evolve into social actors and thus independent contributors to society. This paradigm of adolescent development and dependency is not only inaccurate, young people have been agents who have changed practices in social relations in families since childhood, but also detrimental to their capacity to participate in democratic society. When educators apply this paradigm, which they so often do, young people learn to be passive subjects who wait for others, particularly adults, to tell them what to do, how to think, and what to say. The learning of passive subjectivities contradicts the main objective of democracy, allowing the independent, free-thinking voices of citizens to be heard on some level. We suggest a Freirean perspective of young people, one that posits their capacity to produce knowledge to transform their world. In this regard, youth should be recognized as subjects of a knowledge production that supports their agency for personal and social transformation. If democracy still seems to be a noble ideal, then supporting youth agency should be considered a high priority. The only chance for democracy to expand in the next generation is for young people to be perceived of and treated as vital agents of social transformation. Limiting their agency by undermining their efforts to improve community conditions will render them objects of knowledge, vessels to be filled. The advancement of an active and engaged citizenry requires the edifying practice of acknowledging and supporting youth agency and youth people's capacity to become subjects of knowledge and social transformation. We are mindful, however, not to over-romanticize youth agency. In fact, we acknowledge that youth are often constrained by economic and political forces rather than controlled by them. That is, we wish to convey the idea that the personal choices that young people make are often subject to the constraints and opportunities available to them. Engaging youth in social change efforts bring about clear benefits to both young people and their communities. Youth who are engaged in programs that address neighborhood, school, or community issues develop feelings of social responsibility, a sense of connectedness to their community, improved self-esteem, and an increased understanding of social issues. From 2001 to 2003, a multiracial coalition of Asian and Pacific Island youth in Alameda County in the Northern California Bay Area, along with hundreds of other youth of color, engaged in a successful youth organizing campaign to stop the expansion of the juvenile hall in their community known as the Super Jail. Alameda County doesn't need a bigger juvenile hall. What we need is schools in our community, books, not bars, schools, not jails, chanted a group of more than 100 youth activists as they marched 3 blocks from the Lake Merritt Transit Station in Oakland to the Alameda County Administration Building to demand a meeting with the member of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, Alice Lee Bichter. The young people carried signs that read, "Expand minds, not prisons," and "Books, not bars, justice for all." And after listening to speeches about the injustice of the juvenile system, they tried to gain access to the building. The supervisor had refused to meet with them during previous attempts, and they were denied admittance once again. Undeterred, their voices grew louder as they marched in circles in front of the building chanting, "Come on, Alice, do what's right. And we're not leaving till we get a meeting." Unfortunately, the supervisor snuck out the back entrance, but the demonstration generated television and newspaper coverage and started a public conversation around the issue of youth incarceration. This is a glimpse of the effort of a diverse group of youth to stop the expansion of juvenile hall in their communities. Although the success of the anti-super jail campaign depended on the organized efforts of hundreds of youth, the participation of Asian and Pacific Islander youth of AYPAL was critical for the campaign's outcome. They participated in many protest rallies, attended numerous Alameda County Board of Supervisor meetings, traveled to California Board of Correction meetings in San Diego and Sacramento, pressured elected officials who supported the expansion with phone calls and public demonstration, and informed the public about the expansion in a grassroots campaign of door-to-door visits. The anti-super jail campaign started in the spring of 2001 after Alameda County's probation department requested a total of $54 million from the California State Board of Correction to build a larger juvenile hall. To secure funds for the expansion, the probation department released inaccurate figures about the violence, claiming an increase by 64% in 1999, when in fact crimes by young people had decreased by 27%. The department later admitted the mistake. Outraged by the news, a local youth media council organized a press conference to call attention to this matter. These young people, who understood firsthand the distortion of data by city officials to criminalize youth, joined the movement to stop the super jail. The critical consciousness among young people about the juvenile injustice system called many into action. Throughout the 2-year struggle, which was followed closely in local newspapers, the anti-super jail campaign took many twists and turns before the coalition won its demands. In May of 2003, the coalition members' hard work paid off when the Alameda County Board of Supervisors voted for a smaller juvenile hall from the original proposal of 540 beds to 330, to be located closer to the city of Oakland, where 2/3 of those detained lived, and to seek programs that promoted alternatives to incarceration. Why should we care about the youth agency and attempt to distinguish among forms of resistance? If one considers the fact that many social movements in the United States and elsewhere have relied heavily upon strategic resistance among young people, the answer to those questions become obvious. Particularly in recent times, anti-war movements, immigrant rights movements, challenge to police brutality, and the prison industrial complex, environmental movements, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer questioning movements, and anti-racial movements have all relied heavily upon the commitments of youth activists. This has been true in the United States as well as other countries. Just as the youth of Soweto were able to revive the anti-apartheid struggle through their uprising against the racist educational policies of the apartheid regime in 1976, so too many it be young people from marginalized and disenfranchised communities in the United States who step forward to generate a social movement that begins to move the country in a more progressive and humane direction. And this ends our reading.